In the winter of 1848, a strange pair of travelers moved through the American South. One was a wealthy white gentleman, the other was his obedient slave. They boarded trains, checked into hotels, and passed through slave states where freedom was impossible for people of African descent. No one suspected them. No guards stopped them. No slave catchers questioned them. But there was a secret hidden behind this unusual journey. The wealthy white gentleman was not white, and he was not a man. He was actually an enslaved woman named Ellen Craft, and the slave traveling beside her was her husband, William Craft. Together, they carried out one of the most daring escapes in the history of American slavery. Welcome to ASHEN Truths, where we uncover the darkest and most forgotten stories buried deep in history. Tonight's story reveals the incredible escape of a slave couple who fooled an entire nation, life in chains. Before their daring escape, Ellen Craft and William Craft were enslaved in the state of. Slavery in the American South during the antebellum period was a system built on strict Georgia control. They could be bought. Enslaved people were treated as property, sold, or separated from their families at any moment. William Craft worked as a skilled carpenter. His abilities made him valuable to his owner, but they did not bring him freedom. Ellen's life was even more complicated. She had a very light complexion because her father was her enslaver. This painful reality was common in the South, where slave owners often fathered children with enslaved women. Because of her appearance, Ellen was sometimes mistaken for white. It was a fact that would later become the key to one of the most daring escape plans ever attempted. William and Ellen lived under the constant fear of being sold. And for enslaved couples, that fear was very real. Families were often broken apart when owners decided to sell slaves for profit. William once said that the thought of being separated from Ellen was unbearable. The couple knew they needed to escape. But escaping from Georgia was extremely dangerous. Slave patrols watched the roads. Runaway slaves were hunted by professional slave catchers, and anyone caught trying to escape could face brutal punishment. Yet Ellen and William believed they had discovered a plan so unusual that no one would ever suspect it. A plan that would turn the entire system of slavery against itself. The dangerous disguise. The escape plan created by Ellen Craft and William Craft was unlike anything anyone had attempted before. Instead of sneaking through forests at night or hiding along secret routes of the Underground Railroad, they decided to travel openly. Their plan relied on something very dangerous: deception. Because Ellen had a very light complexion, strangers often assumed she was white. The couple realized that if she disguised herself as a white man, she could travel freely across the South. But the disguise had to be convincing. Ellen cut her hair short. She dressed in the clothes of a wealthy Southern gentleman. To hide her face, she wore a large hat and dark glasses. But there was another problem. Ellen had never learned how to write. If someone asked her to sign a document, the plan would collapse immediately. So they came up with another clever solution. Ellen wrapped her right arm in bandages and placed it in a sling. If anyone asked her to sign papers, she could claim that her arm was injured. This small detail could save their lives. In their story, Ellen would pretend to be a sick plantation owner traveling north for medical treatment. William would act as her loyal slave, accompanying his master on the journey. The plan was incredibly risky. They would have to travel through multiple slave states. They would ride trains, stay in hotels, and pass through places where slave catchers watched for runaways. If anyone discovered the truth, both Ellen and William could be arrested immediately. But despite the danger, the couple believed this disguise gave them their best chance. On December 21st, 1848, they began their journey. A journey that would carry them nearly 1,000 miles toward freedom. The journey begins. On the morning of December 21st, 1848, the escape began. Disguised as a wealthy Southern gentleman, Ellen Craft stepped confidently onto a train platform in Macon. Beside her stood her husband, William Craft, playing the role of her obedient slave. To everyone watching, the scene looked perfectly normal. A white master traveling with his servant. But inside, both of them were terrified. If anyone recognized them, their journey would end instantly. And the punishment for attempting to escape slavery could be brutal. The train began moving northward. Their first destination was Savannah, where they would board a steamboat for the next part of their journey. Throughout the trip, Ellen carefully maintained her disguise. She avoided speaking whenever possible. When people addressed her, she responded briefly and confidently. Her bandaged arm provided the perfect excuse to avoid writing or signing documents. But the danger appeared sooner than expected. During the train ride, a man sat down beside Ellen. To her shock, she recognized him immediately. He was a friend of her enslaver. If he recognized her, the escape would be over. Ellen kept her head turned away, pretending to be ill. The man spoke politely to her, assuming she was a sick, white gentleman traveling north. Fortunately, he never realized who she really was. But this moment made the couple realize how dangerous the journey truly was. And they still had hundreds of miles left to travel, crossing slave states. After leaving Savannah, Ellen Craft and William Craft continued their journey north. Their route required them to travel through several slave states where escaping slaves were often captured and returned to their owners. They boarded a steamboat that carried them along the coast towards South Carolina. Every step of the journey required absolute confidence. Ellen had to behave exactly like a wealthy white plantation owner. William had to remain in character as her enslaved servant. If either of them made a mistake, their disguise could fall apart instantly. At one stop along the journey, they entered a hotel where travelers were required to register their names. This moment created a dangerous problem. The clerk asked Ellen to sign the guest register, but Ellen could not write. For a moment, the situation felt hopeless. Then she lifted her bandaged arm and explained that she had been injured. The clerk accepted the explanation without suspicion. They were allowed to continue. As the couple moved from one city to another, their journey became more stressful. They traveled by train, by boat, and by carriage. Every new station or checkpoint brought the possibility of discovery. At one point, Ellen was required to sit in a train compartment reserved for white passengers. Meanwhile, William was forced to sit in a separate section for enslaved people. For the first time during their journey, the couple was physically separated. William feared that if Ellen was questioned, she might be exposed. Ellen feared that William might be inspected by suspicious officials. But somehow their plan continued working. They successfully passed through Charleston, one of the most heavily guarded slave ports in the South. With each mile they traveled north, they were getting closer to freedom. But their most dangerous test was still ahead, because they would soon reach a place where escaped slaves were carefully examined, the city of Baltimore, the most dangerous stop. After days of traveling through the South, Ellen Craft and William Craft approached one of the most dangerous parts of their journey, the city of Baltimore. Baltimore was a major checkpoint between slave states and free states. Officials there were known for closely inspecting travelers and enslaved people moving through the city. Many runaway slaves had been captured at this location. As Ellen and William arrived at the train station, the tension between them grew. William was ordered to step aside with other enslaved men. A railway officer began checking documents that proved slaves belonged to their masters. Without those documents, William could be detained immediately. The officer turned to Ellen. He expected confirmation that William was her property. For a moment, everything depended on Ellen's ability to stay calm. Remembering her role as a wealthy Southern gentleman, she spoke firmly and confidently. She explained that she was ill and traveling north for medical treatment. She also complained that the officer was delaying her journey. Her confident tone worked. The officer apologized and allowed them to continue without asking further questions, but the danger had been very real. If the officer had insisted on examining William more closely, the escape would have ended there. Once they boarded the next train, the couple realized something incredible. They had passed the final slave state checkpoint. Ahead of them lay Philadelphia, a city where slavery was illegal. Freedom was now within reach. Arrival in freedom. After passing the dangerous checkpoint in Baltimore, the train continued its journey north. Inside the carriage, Ellen Craft sat quietly, still dressed as a wealthy white gentleman. Across the train, William Craft remained in the section reserved for enslaved people. Even though they had passed the last slave state inspection, they could not relax yet. Until they reached their destination, they had to remain in character. Finally, the train crossed into Pennsylvania. At that time, Pennsylvania was a free state. Slavery was illegal there. For the first time in their lives, Ellen and William were standing on land where they could not legally be owned. When the train arrived in Philadelphia, the couple stepped off together. Their 5-day journey from slavery to freedom was complete. They had traveled nearly 1,000 miles, passing through several slave states without being discovered. Soon after arriving in Philadelphia, they were welcomed by members of the Underground Railroad. Abolitionists in the city helped them find safety and shelter. For the first time, Ellen could remove her disguise. The white gentleman's clothing, the hat, the bandages. All of it had been part of one of the most daring escape plans in American history. But although they had reached freedom, their story was far from over. Because even in free states, the threat of capture still existed. And soon a new law would place them in danger once again. Hunted even in freedom. For a short time after arriving in Philadelphia, Ellen Craft and William Craft finally experienced life as free people. Abolitionists connected with the Underground Railroad helped them settle safely. Soon they moved to Boston, one of the strongest centers of the anti-slavery movement. In Boston, the Crafts became well known among abolitionists. They spoke publicly about their escape. Their story amazed audiences. People could hardly believe how Ellen had successfully disguised herself as a white plantation owner and traveled across the South without being discovered. But in 1850, a new law changed everything. The United States government passed the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850. This law allowed slave owners to capture escaped slaves even in free states. Federal authorities were required to help return runaway slaves to their owners, and anyone who helped them escape could be punished. Soon after the law was passed, the Crafts' former enslavers sent slave hunters to Boston. Their mission was simple: capture Ellen and William and return them to Georgia. The situation became extremely dangerous. But the abolitionist community in Boston refused to let them be taken. Citizens organized protection for the couple. Some people even guarded their home at night. Still, the risk of capture remained high. Eventually, their supporters made a difficult decision. If Ellen and William wanted to remain free, they would have to leave the United States entirely. A new life in England. With slave hunters searching for them in Boston, Ellen Craft and William Craft knew they could not remain safely in America. Even though they were living in a free state, the Fugitive Slave Act of 1850 meant they could still be captured and returned to slavery. With help from abolitionist supporters, the couple secretly left the United States. They crossed the Atlantic Ocean and arrived in England. There, they were finally beyond the reach of American slave hunters. In England, the Crafts began building a new life as free people. They spoke publicly about their incredible escape story. Their story shocked many audiences who had never fully understood the cruelty of American slavery. The couple also became active in the abolitionist movement, working with others who were fighting to end slavery around the world. During their time in England, Ellen and William received education and continued sharing their experiences. In 1860, they published a book titled Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom. The book told the full story of their daring escape from slavery. Readers across Europe and America were amazed by the courage and intelligence behind their plan. Years later, after the end of the American Civil War, the Crafts eventually returned to the United States. They settled again in Georgia, the same state where they had once lived as slaves. But this time they returned as free people. They dedicated their lives to education and helping formerly enslaved people build new futures. Their escape remained one of the most daring and creative acts of resistance in the history of slavery. The story of Ellen and William Craft shows how courage and intelligence can challenge even the most powerful systems. By disguising herself as a white plantation owner and traveling openly through the South, Ellen turned the rules of slavery against the very people who believed in it. Their journey reminds us that the fight for freedom often required extraordinary bravery. History is full of stories that powerful people tried to hide. Stories of resistance, stories of courage, stories of individuals who refused to accept the chains placed upon them. Here on ASHEN Truths, we uncover those forgotten truths. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe to ASHEN Truths, like the video, and share your thoughts in the comments. Which part of this incredible escape surprised you the most? Let us know below. And until the next story, thank you for watching.